Darius Alexander had mastered the art of silence long before he mastered the art of wealth. To the world, he was an enigma, handsome in a way that made people stare without realizing it, composed with a stillness that unsettled even the most powerful men. At 30 years old, he had become a dominant force in Nigeria's most elite business circle, especially in gold and diamonds. When his name came up in conversation, it came with a hushed sort of reverence. He didn't have to raise his voice. He didn't need to post pictures on social media or grace the covers of gossip magazines. His silence screamed louder than noise ever could. And yet, for all the wealth he had built, all the deals he had closed, Darius Alexander was a man people could not understand. More than once, the murmurs had risen above the boardroom whispers and drifted into public speculation. Darius is gay, isn't he? 30 and not even a single girlfriend. Not one scandal. Isn't that strange? He's always with men. That's the giveaway. To some, the rumors were fact. To others, they were fuel for gossip. But Darius didn't care. He never confirmed, never denied. He simply lived. The truth was buried deeper than any of them could dig. Darius had made peace with misunderstanding. In fact, he welcomed it. People could say what they liked, as long as they stayed out of his life. He had never been interested in correcting lies that didn't affect his money, his peace, or his purpose. To him, the world could keep guessing. They thought his silence meant shame. They were wrong. It was protection. It was armor built over years of watching love do the opposite of what it promised. Long before the wealth, long before the luxury and the title billionaire, Darius was just a frightened little boy living in a grand house with bloodstains hidden beneath marble floors. His father, Chief Charles Alexander, was a man feared by many and respected by fools. He built an empire with steel hands, but his cruelty began at home. He believed power was best exercised on the weak, and unfortunately, the weakest in his reach was his wife. Darius's mother, Celeste. Celeste was a quiet woman with eyes that used to laugh before they learned to stay closed. She was elegant, educated, and deeply loyal to a man who broke her in stages. Every day in that house was survival. Every silence, every footstep, every clink of a wine glass could precede a storm. Sometimes it came in the form of harsh words. Other times, fists. Darius remembered the first time he saw his mother bleed. He was 7. He had crept down the hallway to get a glass of water and heard the muffled sobs. He peeked through the crack in the study door and saw his mother on the floor. Her lips split, her blouse torn, her shoulders trembling. His father towered above her, breathing hard, his belt still in his hand. And Darius, just a little boy with no strength, no voice, could only watch. That night, he didn't sleep. Not because he was afraid his father would come for him next, but because he couldn't understand how someone could hurt someone they claimed to love. He asked his mother the next morning, "Why didn't you leave?" She smiled at him with a swollen lip and said, "Because I love you, and because if I leave, they'll say I failed. I can't let them talk." Darius didn't understand it then, but something inside him broke, something fundamental. He began to associate love with pain, with entrapment, with a woman staying in chains just so society wouldn't label her a runaway wife. And he made a silent vow that night. "No, I'll never be the reason someone cries like that. Ever." Years passed, but the memories never faded. Even after his father died of a heart attack when Darius was 22, the fear lingered. And when his mother died 3 years later, quietly in her sleep, her heart giving up after years of silent suffering, Darius buried her with tears only the grave saw. She had stayed until death, loyal to a man who never loved her. And she had raised a boy who swore never to touch love until he could wield it with gentleness and courage. But the world didn't care about backstories. It only saw the billionaire who never smiled at women, never dated, never showed desire. And so the rumors began. People speculated that Darius was gay because no woman had ever been photographed by his side. They whispered behind champagne glasses that he was probably sleeping with his assistant, a stiff, unsmiling man named Benjamin, or with his stern-faced business partner, Idris. The press called him the Ice King. Socialites found it suspicious. Others found it fascinating. But no one really knew. What they didn't understand was that Darius wasn't hiding a relationship. He wasn't ashamed. He was just waiting. Waiting for the kind of love that didn't make someone afraid. Waiting for a woman who reminded him of peace, not chaos. In the meantime, he built empires. Alexander Holdings owned 4 of the largest gold export terminals in Africa. His diamond supply contracts stretched from South Africa to Belgium. He didn't just move wealth, he defined it. Other billionaires courted attention, flaunted women, attended every gala. Darius? He skipped events. He sent reps. He avoided parties. The few times he appeared in public, it was in a black suit, dark sunglasses, and with an expression that warned, "Ask me nothing." His office in Victoria Island was a fortress. Glass, steel, and silence. His home was even more guarded. Only a few had ever entered his penthouse. Greg, his oldest friend, was one of them. They had met in university and remained close ever since, mostly because Greg never asked too many questions. He just existed beside Darius without demanding explanations. But even Greg didn't know the full truth. No one did. The truth was simple but unspoken. Darius had only ever fallen in love once, a girl who made him feel like a man again, not a broken boy from a bloody house. Her name was Sarah, Greg's younger sister, the one person who had looked at him with soft understanding and did try to figure him out. She smiled like sunlight, spoke like poetry, and passed through his world too briefly, just once, at a Christmas gathering 5 years ago. He never forgot her. But he had buried that desire just like everything else. Until now. Now the time was coming when he would break his rules. But for now, Darius moved through the world like a ghost in a glass palace, untouched by rumors, unmoved by praise, and unbothered by the noise. He drove his matte black Range Rover through the city like a man with nowhere to be emotionally. He took his meetings, signed deals, and walked past beautiful women like they were streetlights, noticed but not needed. The world misunderstood him, but Darius had made peace with that, because only he knew the truth. And one day, they would all see it, not through explanation, but through action. He didn't speak about love. He planned to prove it instead. Rain fell hard against the glass walls of Alexander Holdings, washing the city skyline in long, smudged streaks of gray. Inside the building, however, all remained still, just like the man who owned it. Darius Alexander sat alone in his private lounge on the top floor. The world below him buzzed with problems, ambition, and gossip, but he sat unmoved, sipping black coffee, his phone on silent. The room was vast, minimal, and pristine, exactly how he liked it. He found peace in stillness, in control, in knowing every part of his life was a fortress with no cracks. But that night, someone managed to shake the fortress. At 8:47 p.m., his assistant, Benjamin, buzzed through the intercom. "Sir, Greg's here. He's in bad shape." Darius didn't flinch. "Send him up." Greg Lawson, his closest friend and the only person Darius allowed into his personal life, stumbled into the penthouse, drenched in sweat and rain. His eyes were bloodshot, shirt clinging to his body, lips trembling like a man on the edge. "Close the door," Darius said calmly. Greg obeyed. He stood silently for a few seconds, dripping on the marble floor, before collapsing into a chair like his legs could no longer carry the weight of what was hunting him. "I messed up," he whispered. Darius didn't speak. He waited. "I borrowed money, a lot, from the wrong people." His voice cracked. "Darius, I was desperate. I kept thinking I could flip it, reinvest. But now they want it back, and they're not playing games anymore." "How much?" Darius asked. Greg rubbed his face with shaky hands. 80 million naira. Due in 6 days. They've threatened me. They said if I don't pay, they'll come for my family first, then me. Silence stretched between them. Darius didn't react the way most friends would. He didn't rush to console him, didn't gasp in shock or rage. He simply looked at Greg, long and hard, as if measuring not just the debt, but the man who owed it. "I'll give you the money," he said quietly. Greg looked up, eyes wide, relief flooding his expression. "But I want something in return." The relief vanished. "What?" Greg asked cautiously. Darius stood and walked to the window, staring out at the rain. He spoke without turning around. "Sarah." A pause. A deep, cold silence that choked the room. "My sister?" Greg asked as if his ears had misheard him. "Yes," Darius said. "I want to marry her." Greg's breath caught. He stood slowly, heart thudding against his ribs like a warning drum. "You want to what?" Darius turned, finally facing him. His eyes were unreadable, but his voice was steady. "You need 80 million to stay alive. I'll give you 100, enough to cover everything and disappear if needed. But I want Sarah. I want her to marry me." Greg's voice came out in a near whisper. "Why?" Darius didn't answer immediately. He didn't believe in justifying himself to anyone, not even Greg. But this was different. "Because she's the only woman I've ever wanted, and I don't want to wait anymore." Greg took a step back, shocked to his core. In all their years of friendship, Darius had never even mentioned a woman's name romantically. The rumors, the silence, now this. "But people say you're not into women." "I don't care what people say," Darius cut in. "You've known me for 15 years. Have I ever asked for anything from you?" Greg shook his head slowly. "I'm asking now. Marry her to me." Greg ran his fingers through his wet hair. "What about Sarah's feelings? She's not some tradable asset." Darius's jaw clenched. "I don't want her because she's a prize. I want her because she's the only person who ever looked at me like I was human. Not a mystery, not a billionaire. Just a man. If I could win her the right way, I would. But I don't have time. You need saving. I need her. This is the deal." It was cruel. It was transactional. But it was also the truth. Greg paced the room, torn between protecting his sister and saving his life. The men he owed weren't empty threat kind of men. They would kill him. They had killed before, and he had no other options. "You take care of her?" Greg asked at last, voice hoarse. Darius nodded once. "Like she's everything I have." Greg turned to the window, breathing hard. He thought of his baby sister, gentle, warm, full of dreams. Could he really hand her to a man who'd never loved anyone, but said he would? "Let me talk to her," Greg said at last. "She has to agree." Darius nodded again. "I'll give you till morning, then I wire the money." Greg left that night in silence, the weight of the deal haunting every step. He was about to trade his sister's freedom for his own life. And Sarah didn't know it yet. The knock came at exactly 9:03 p.m. Sarah Lawson opened the door of her small flat in Surulere to find her older brother, Greg, standing there with his collar turned up and anxiety resting heavy on his face. He hadn't called ahead, hadn't texted, but from the look in his eyes, she knew something wasn't right. Still, she stepped aside. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I need to talk to you," he said as he entered. "Of course you do," she muttered, shutting the door. "It's always I need to talk with you. Sit." He sat, restless, fingers twitching. Sarah took a seat across from him, arms folded, waiting. "You remember Darius?" he asked suddenly. "Your billionaire best friend that no one understands?" she quipped. "Of course. He wants to marry you." The words struck her like unexpected thunder. She blinked once, twice. "Greg, what?" "He wants to marry you," Greg repeated, slower this time. "And I think you should consider it." Sarah stared at him, her lips parting slightly in disbelief. "Are you joking?" "I'm not," he said quickly. "He spoke to me this week. He said he's been thinking about it for a long time. He's not the kind of man who talks much, you know that. But he's serious, Sarah. I've never seen him like this." Greg, she said slowly, I haven't seen Darius in 2 years. And back then I only exchanged maybe 3 sentences with him. Greg nodded. But he remembers. You made an impression. He's a man who doesn't take interest in just anyone. Sarah tilted her head. Everyone thinks he doesn't even like women. Greg's voice was calm, too calm. Let people think what they want. You're not marrying the rumors, you're marrying the man. She studied him. He was hiding something. His knee bounced nervously. His smile was too tight. But he didn't look like a man scheming against her. He looked like a man trying to protect her from something she couldn't see yet. Why now? She asked. Why does he want me now? He's been watching, thinking. Darius is a man who calculates. He doesn't chase trends or follow what society expects. He moves when he's sure, and he's sure about you. Sarah sat back in her seat, her mind suddenly turning like a wheel in mud. Her brother was reckless, that much she knew. Greg had always gotten in over his head. Too many promises, too many shortcuts, and lately he had been jumpy, silent over the phone, skipping family brunches, making vague excuses. Something was wrong. Maybe it wasn't being said aloud, but she felt it. So this marriage offer? It wasn't love. It was safety, stability, a shield. Her brother was in trouble. That was clear. And when Greg was in trouble, so was she. They had no father. Their mother was long gone. All they had was each other. And if Greg had reached the point where he was suggesting she marry a man like Darius Alexander, then things were worse than she could imagine. Still, she didn't press. If Greg wasn't ready to admit whatever mess he was tangled in, she wouldn't force it out of him. But she would act. And Darius? Of all the men she could be tied to in this chaotic, dangerous city, Darius was the only one who would never let harm touch her. He didn't chase women, didn't chase attention, didn't use people for sport. He didn't speak often, but when he did, his words carried weight. She remembered the way he had looked at her that night at Greg's birthday dinner. Like she wasn't just a pretty face, but someone worth seeing. The world didn't understand him. Maybe it never would. But Sarah didn't need the world's approval. She needed peace. And maybe Darius, in all his mystery, was her safest bet. If I say yes, she said finally, what happens next? Greg sat up straighter. He wants something simple. No media, no church parade, just a civil ceremony. Elegant, but private. He'll handle everything. Sarah nodded. You don't have to say yes now. I already did. Greg blinked. You did? She stood, smoothing her shirt. Yes. Tell him I accept. He stood as well, cautiously walking to hug her. You're doing the right thing, Sarah. But she didn't hug him back right away. Instead, she whispered, I just hope you are. Because deep in her heart, she knew she wasn't just marrying for herself. She was protecting them both. The days moved faster than Sarah expected, swallowed by phone calls, swift arrangements, and an overwhelming hush that settled over everything. There were no long family meetings, no bridal showers, or sleepless nights filled with girl talk giggles. Just an efficient plan executed with ruthless precision. Darius's way. She saw him once before the wedding. Winter, the meeting was brief, held in one of the suites at the Belvoir, a luxury hotel in Ikoyi. Darius stood by the window dressed in all black, no tie, no excess. Just sleek lines and quiet power. When she walked in, something passed between them. Acknowledgement, not affection. Thank you for accepting, he said, eyes calm and unreadable. Sarah's voice was softer than she intended. You didn't give me much of a choice. Darius didn't smile, but something flickered in his gaze. I never force anyone. You chose. That was true. She had, not out of romance or fantasy, but survival. Her instincts told her that in Darius's world, she would never be unprotected. That was enough. The wedding was set for the following Saturday. From that moment, she didn't have to lift a finger. The next day, 3 women arrived at her flat bearing garment bags, shoe boxes, and velvet cases. The lead stylist handed her a note in Darius's penmanship. Everything has been taken care of. You are not to worry about anything, D.A. Inside the bags were silks and lace, delicate beading, hand-stitched elegance. The wedding dress shimmered like moonlight, off-white, modern, expensive. The shoes, imported from Italy, matched perfectly. A team was arranged to do her makeup, hair, and nails on the morning of the wedding. Sarah stood in her tiny kitchen, holding a stiletto heel in one hand and staring at the pristine gown, as the question whispered through her mind like a ghost. Wasn't this the man they said didn't care for women? She didn't say it aloud, but the contradiction wrapped itself around her heart. If he didn't care, then why all this? She would learn later. Darius never did anything halfway. The wedding morning came with golden Lagos sunlight breaking through the haze. Her makeup artist arrived at 6 a.m. sharp. Soft hues, class, no drama. Her hair was swept into a low, elegant bun with soft curls framing her face. She didn't recognize herself in the mirror when they finished. She looked like a woman from a magazine cover. By 10 a.m., she was in the back seat of a black Rolls-Royce Phantom headed toward the Civil Registry Hall in Banana Island. The event was enclosed. Only 12 guests. No noise, no cameras. Only those who mattered or were paid not to speak. Darius stood waiting, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark charcoal suit, his features carved in stillness. He didn't blink when she entered. He just watched her with those dark eyes as she walked slowly toward him. There were no vows written from the heart, no dramatic declarations. Just a civil officer reciting lines, Greg shifting nervously in his seat, and Darius slipping a diamond ring onto Sarah's slender finger. You may now sign. Pen met paper. Names were written. In the eyes of the state, she became Sarah Alexander. After the documents were sealed and stamped, Darius turned toward Greg, pulling out a slim, embossed checkbook from his jacket. He wrote slowly, then tore the page and handed it over. 100 million, he said. Greg looked at it like it might burst into flames. I told you I'd help, Darius continued, voice calm but edged. But from this moment on, she's my wife, my responsibility. Anything you do from here, any mistake, any mess, it must never touch her again. Greg swallowed. I understand. I mean it, Greg. If anything about your life rubs off on her, I won't be this generous again. There was no need for threats. The promise was clear. Darius had drawn a line and Sarah was now behind it, shielded by the full force of his name, his wealth, and his silence. When the ceremony ended, there was no dancing, no loud celebration, only glasses raised for a quiet toast, a catered lunch served in whispers, and Greg walking away with a check tucked into his breast pocket and the weight of guilt heavy on his shoulders. Sarah stood beside Darius as everyone dispersed, her hand resting lightly in his. They didn't speak much, but when she glanced up at him and saw how his fingers tightened protectively around hers, she knew one thing. This might not have been a love story, but it was a promise, and she intended to live it. The first thing Sarah noticed about Darius's penthouse was the silence. Not the kind that unsettles, but the kind that commands respect. High above the noise of Lagos, his home didn't just sit in the clouds that ruled them. Floor-to-ceiling glass framed the skyline like artwork. Clean lines, deep tones, polished floors, expensive taste. Everything in its place. Everything untouched. Just like him. Their wedding night had not been a night at all, more like extended handshake with formality. After the wedding, they rode in silence back to the building Darius owned on Bourdieu Road. His penthouse took up the entire top floor. There were no scattered clothes, no unwashed plates, no evidence of a man who lived emotionally. The space was sharp, structured, lonely. This is your home now, he said as the elevator doors slid open into the suite. Sarah's heels echoed softly against the marble floor as she stepped in. Do I get to choose a room? He blinked once. You'll sleep in the master. It's big enough. But if you'd prefer a separate room, I'll have one made ready. She turned to look at him. Is that what you want? Darius hesitated, the first crack in his usual stoicism. I don't want you to feel like a prisoner here. That's all I'll ever promise: your freedom and your safety." She nodded, unsure whether to feel comforted or distant. "Thank you." The first few days passed like that: formal, distant, polite. Every morning, Sarah woke up in sheets that smelled like fresh linen and money. The view from her balcony stretched across Lagos. But it was the man in the room next to her who held her attention. Not because he was present, but because he wasn't. Darius disappeared early in the mornings and came home late at night. He never failed to check on her, never forgot to ask if she needed anything. But it felt clinical, like she was a guest in a five-star hotel with a host too mysterious to ever truly know. On the third evening, she found herself standing in the open-concept kitchen, barefoot in her silk robe, stirring tea she didn't want. When Darius walked in, suit still on, phone in hand, she didn't expect him to stop. But he did. "You're still awake," he said. "I live here now," she replied, setting the cup down. "I figured it's okay to use the kitchen." He stepped closer, eyes fixed on the steam rising from her mug. "This is your home, Sarah. You don't need permission." She looked up at him, searching for something behind his carefully neutral tone. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded once. "Why me?" A long silence. Then, "You saw me, and you didn't flinch." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "At Greg's birthday dinner," he said, voice softer than usual. "Everyone else stared, wondered, measured me. But you looked at me like I was just a man eating suya in the corner." Sarah smiled faintly. "You were eating suya like your life depended on it." He chuckled, a real quiet laugh that lit up his face for a brief second before vanishing. "I liked that moment. I remembered it." She held his gaze. "But you could have had anyone. You're Darius Alexander. You chose to marry a woman people think you're not even interested in." His jaw flexed. "I chose to marry someone I could protect, someone I wouldn't hurt. That matters to me." And there it was, the edge of his truth. She didn't press further, not yet. But in that quiet exchange, something shifted. Darius wasn't cold. He was cautious. A man who carried shadows. And Sarah, for the first time, wasn't afraid of them. She watched as he turned, loosened his tie, and walked toward his wing of the penthouse. Just before disappearing down the hallway, he looked over his shoulder. "Sleep well, Mrs. Alexander." And though it wasn't said with passion, it was said with purpose. Sarah sipped her tea, her heart strangely full. This was not a love story, but it was the beginning of something. And beginnings, she had learned, mattered just as much as endings. Sarah had always believed that still water ran deep, but living with Darius Alexander showed her a new truth. Some waters were so still, they drowned you in their silence. Their marriage unfolded with the rhythm of strangers sharing a castle. There were no arguments, no shared meals unless she insisted, no late-night conversations. But every corner of the penthouse reflected one thing: Darius's need for order, perfection, control. It wasn't until the third week of their marriage that she found the piano. It was hidden in a second lounge at the far end of the penthouse. She had been exploring anything to feel less like a guest and more like a wife. The room was dim, quiet, and smelled faintly of old wood and cologne. The piano sat in the center, untouched, like a monument to something lost. Her fingers brushed the keys. One soft note rang out, trembling through the still air. "I haven't played that in years." She turned sharply. Darius stood at the door, jacket gone, shirt sleeves rolled, the look on his face unreadable. "I didn't know you played," she said gently. "I don't," he replied. "Not anymore." There was a long pause. He walked in slowly, eyes fixed on the instrument. She watched him lower himself into the bench beside her. "My mother used to play," he said, surprising her. "She taught me when I was a child, before everything." Sarah didn't interrupt. She could hear the edge in his voice, the way memory curled around his words like barbed wire. She loved music. She said it was the only thing that made her forget how small the world could be inside a big house. He stared at the keys, unmoving. "After my father started changing. She stopped playing. Then one day, the piano just sat in the corner. Silent. Like her. Sarah looked at him, her throat tight. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. She stayed until she couldn't anymore. He continued, voice lower now. "She died with a heart that never knew freedom. I told myself I'd never love anyone until I could give them what she never had." Silence settled between them. Not heavy, not awkward, just full, real. "And now you're married to someone who didn't ask to be loved," Sarah said softly, her eyes on him. He turned to her, slowly. "I didn't marry you to fix anything. I married you to protect something." "What?" she asked. He held her gaze. "Peace." It was the most honest thing he had said since their wedding day. In that moment, Sarah didn't see the billionaire or the myth. She saw the boy who had watched his mother's spirit dim room by room. The boy who had learned too early that silence was safer than love. The man who carried that silence like a second skin. She reached out, gently placed her hand over his. "I'm not afraid of your quiet," she said, "but I won't let it swallow me either." His eyes flickered, and for a moment he looked like he wanted to say something more, but didn't. Instead, he stood, nodded once, and left the room. But the silence that followed wasn't cold anymore. It was something else, something fragile, something that, if nurtured, might grow into something neither of them dared to name. The walls of the penthouse hadn't changed, but the air had. Something subtle shifted after the night by the piano. Darius didn't become more talkative, and Sarah didn't push. But there were small changes, undeniable, silent gestures that spoke volumes. He started leaving notes. Short, to-the-point lines scribbled in tight handwriting. "Meeting may run late. Dinner's in the warmer. Sleep well. Saw your book on the counter. I read that in school. It's a good one. You looked peaceful this morning. I didn't want to wake you." Sarah would find them tucked beside her coffee cup or slipped into the pages of her journal. He never mentioned them, but she kept every single one. And then came the tea. One evening, she stepped into the kitchen only to find Darius already there, sleeves rolled up, pouring hot water into her favorite mug, the one she always used after 8 p.m. She raised an eyebrow, amused. "You're making tea now?" "I pay 5 chefs," he said dryly. "None of them know how you like it." She smiled. "So you've been watching me?" He didn't answer, but the curve of his mouth betrayed him. It wasn't a smile, but it was close. She took the mug from him, their fingers brushing. The contact was brief, but her skin burned with the memory of it long after she left the kitchen. That night, sleep didn't come easily. She found herself thinking about him more than she should, wondering what he was doing awake at 3 a.m. alone in the office across the hallway, wondering what kind of nightmares chased a man like Darius, wondering if her presence made those nights quieter. And then there was the gift. No note, no warning. Just a box on her vanity one morning. Inside, a pair of handmade gold earrings shaped like tiny vines. Delicate, elegant, like something from a fairy tale. She wore them that evening, though he never said a word about it. But she caught him staring once, just once before he looked away. It was these tiny cracks in the concrete that let the light in. One evening, they ended up watching a documentary together in the living room. She curled up on one end of the couch with a throw blanket. He sat at the other end, posture relaxed for once, his tie loosened, a faint shadow of stubble on his chin. She asked a question about the mining industry midway through the film, and for the first time since they married, Darius spoke at length, animated, precise, and, to her surprise, passionate. "You actually care about this," she said after he finished explaining how artisanal miners are exploited in West Africa. He looked at her, eyes steady. "My mother used to say if you're going to dig into the earth, you better come out with more than just stones." Sarah smiled at that. "She sounds like a woman I'd have liked." "You would have," he said softly. A long silence followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Sarah pulled her knees to her chest and turned to him. "Do you ever miss her?" Every day, he replied without hesitation. The way he said it, raw, unguarded, left her throat tight. She wanted to ask more. About his mother, about the scars he never showed, about the silence that used to build walls between them, but now only seemed to hang like mist, soft, lingering. But she didn't. Instead, she reached for the remote and changed the topic. They watched the rest of the documentary in silence, their bodies still on opposite ends of the couch. But something in the space between them had shifted. It was no longer a gap. It was a bridge. It started with a headline. Billionaire Darius Alexander, seen again without wife, closeted or composed. The blog had used an old photo, Darius leaving a gala flanked by two of his male staff. No Sarah in sight. No mention of the elegant civil wedding. Just assumptions, cruelty disguised as curiosity, and 1,000 anonymous comments full of venom. By the time Sarah saw the post, it had already gone viral. She sat in the breakfast nook of the penthouse, scrolling through her phone, jaw clenched tight. Her tea sat untouched. She didn't care much for gossip blogs, but this one stung. Not because it was new, but because she finally cared. For the first time, the words didn't just target Darius's image. They pierced something in her. They reduced the complexity of him, his quiet kindness, his deep sadness, his buried tenderness, to a caricature. They had no idea who he was, no idea what he'd seen, what he gave, what he kept buried under steel and suits. He walked in moments later, tie half loosened, shirt sleeves rolled. He took one look at her expression and knew. "You saw it," he said flatly. She nodded, her fingers tightening around her phone. "They don't deserve you." His brows lifted slightly. "You're upset." "Of course I am," she snapped, standing. "They don't know you. They don't see what I see. All they do is assume, mock, and twist." He walked toward her slowly, studying her face. "Why does it matter?" "Because I'm your wife," she said, voice trembling. "And they think you're not mine. Like I'm invisible. Like you're some mystery they can rewrite." He didn't reply. Not with words. He stepped closer, took the phone from her hands, set it down, and then gently, like she was a glass he didn't want to break, he touched her cheek. His thumb brushed the corner of her mouth. His eyes, always so guarded, finally held something she hadn't seen before. Desire. Not just interest. Desire. "Come with me," he said, voice husky. He took her hand and led her to the master suite. The lights were low, the room warm. No pretense, no ceremony. Just them. For a moment they stood facing each other, unsure. And then he kissed her. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't rushed. It was everything he'd held back, gentle but aching, deep but controlled. His hands framed her face like she was something rare, precious. Sarah melted into him, breath hitching as her body responded before her mind could. It was their first kiss, but it felt like they had waited a lifetime. He whispered her name between kisses, soft, reverent, as if he needed to remind himself she was real. Every touch was deliberate. Every stroke of his hand along her waist, down her back, made her feel more like a woman than she ever had before. And when he lifted her gently onto the bed, stripped her down piece by piece with careful fingers, he didn't look away. Not once. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "I see you." And then he showed her. With every kiss, every measured thrust, every slow grind of his body against hers, Darius erased the distance they'd once kept. It wasn't wild. It wasn't rushed. It was worship, quiet, deep, mutual. She arched into him, wrapped her arms around his neck, gasping his name like a prayer. He made her feel claimed, cherished, chosen. And when they reached the edge together, breathless, tangled, undone, it wasn't just bodies that met. It was everything they hadn't said, everything they had dared not admit. Afterwards, she lay against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek, his arm wrapped tightly around her like a vow. "I made the right choice," she whispered. He kissed her forehead. So did I. It wasn't about the world anymore. It wasn't about clearing rumors. It wasn't even about proving anything. It was sealed now, in every touch, every wordless confession. Darius Alexander wasn't just into women. He was into her. Only her. And Sarah knew, no matter how long it took to unravel all of him, he was already hers. Darius hadn't slept. Not truly. He had lain beside Sarah, her head resting gently on his chest, his arms wrapped around her like a lifeline. But sleep never came. Instead, his mind traveled back to a house with too many windows and not enough light, to a boy hiding behind a door while the woman who birthed him begged for silence and mercy she would never receive. The warmth of Sarah's body grounded him, but the shadows of his past didn't fade that easily. At exactly 3:17 a.m., he slipped out of bed. She stirred briefly, but didn't wake. He padded barefoot to the balcony, shirtless, the cool Lagos breeze sweeping over his skin as if to chase away the ghosts he could never quite outrun. He lit a cigarette, one of the few remaining vices he allowed himself, and stared into the city lights below. What if she ends up like her? He thought. What if I become him? That fear never left him, no matter how different he was, no matter how careful. Somewhere deep in his marrow lived the terror that the monster who raised him had passed on more than just his last name. He didn't hear Sarah come out, but he felt her arms wrap gently around his waist from behind. Her voice was sleepy, soft. You okay? I'm fine, he lied. You smoke? Sometimes, when I remember things. She said nothing for a moment, just rested her cheek against his back, letting her warmth remind him where he stood, in the present, not the past. You don't have to be afraid, Darius, she said quietly. I'm not afraid of anything, he replied too quickly. She pulled back slightly. You're afraid of becoming him. His body stiffened, his jaw clenched. The silence that followed was suffocating. But Sarah didn't flinch. You're not your father, she whispered. You never will be. Do you think that man would have cared about protecting his wife's peace? Do you think he would have waited, given space, whispered? You're nothing like him. He turned, eyes glassy but fierce. You don't know what it's like to carry his blood, to remember her screams, to feel useless. Sarah reached up, touching his face with both hands. You're not useless. You're not broken. You're human, and you're healing. He shook his head slowly. I don't want to hurt you. You won't, she said firmly, because even in your silence you protect me. I know that. I feel it. For a long moment they stood there, two hearts in a quiet war against a legacy neither of them asked for. Darius dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his heel, and pulled her close. His arms wrapped tightly around her like she was the only anchor he had left. I never want you to be afraid of me, he whispered. I never have been, she replied. Not once. The storm inside him didn't disappear that night, but it finally had somewhere to rest. Sarah's presence became more than comfort. It became proof that healing was possible. He walked back inside with her, hand in hand, and for the first time in years, when Darius lay back on the bed, he let himself fall asleep. Not out of exhaustion, but trust. The first photo leaked 2 days later. A single snapshot, grainy, taken at dusk, of Darius Alexander exiting the private wing of Radisson Blu, with Sarah just a step behind him, her hands slipping gently into his as they entered his car. The shot was simple, quiet, but it exploded like wildfire across the internet. So, he is married? Is that the mystery woman? Darius Alexander finally spotted holding hands with a woman? Power couple or PR move? This time the rumors had changed tone. It wasn't whispers about his sexuality anymore. It was shock, curiosity, intrigue. And beneath it all, jealousy. Sarah saw the post when it hit the blogs. Her phone buzzed for hours. Texts from people she hadn't heard from in years. Sly emojis from extended cousins. Even voice notes from strangers claiming to know her from school. She didn't respond to any of them, but inside her stomach twisted with nerves. The last thing she wanted was attention. Their marriage had been private. Elegant, yes, but far from public. That was Darius's rule. He didn't care for the limelight. So when she walked into the penthouse that evening and saw him seated in the living room, tablet in one hand, reading the headlines, her heart skipped. "You've seen it?" He looked up, expression calm. "Of course I have." She paused. "Do you want to do something about it?" He surprised her by standing and walking toward her, stopping just a few inches from her face. "I do." Her brows lifted. "You do?" "I'm tired of silence," he said, voice low but resolute. "Not because of the rumors, but because you're my wife, and I won't let the world keep pretending you don't exist." Sarah blinked, stunned. Are you saying you want to go public?" He nodded. "I've lived in his shadows long enough." The next morning, his official Instagram, which had sat inactive for over a year, posted a single photo. It was them, a candid one. Sarah leaning against the balcony railing in a soft robe, her profile lit by golden morning light. Darius was beside her, not posing, just looking at her like she was the center of his universe. The caption was simple: "Peace looks like her." The post broke the internet. Celebrities reposted it, newspapers ran it, influencers speculated, and most importantly, no one doubted it. Not anymore. Sarah's phone exploded again, but this time she smiled. Because while the world debated whether it was love, strategy, or art, she knew the truth. It was real. And later that night, after the buzz had died down, she stepped into the living room where Darius sat with a soft drink and a rare look of calm. She curled into the couch beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "That was brave," she said. "No," he whispered, kissing her hair. "You are." They didn't need applause. They didn't need the world's validation. They had each other, and that was the kind of rumor worth living for. The message came through a private number. "We need to talk. It's about Greg." Sarah blinked at her phone, her heartbeat quickening. It was from Benjamin, Darius's assistant. Short, urgent. The kind of message that never arrived unless something was very, very wrong. Greg Lawson had vanished almost a year ago after the wedding, after Darius wrote that 100 million naira check to wipe away the blood-stained debt he owed. He'd left Lagos with no explanation, no goodbye, not even a thank you. And no one had seen him since. Until now, she found Darius already in the living room, phone in hand, jaw clenched tight as he read something. The moment he looked up at her, she knew Greg was back. "He's here," Darius said, voice flat. "Where?" she asked. "I don't know yet, but Benjamin just forwarded a clip to me. He was seen outside a hotel in Ikeja, broke, drunk, talking to anyone who would listen." "About me. About you." Sarah's stomach dropped. Darius rose slowly, walked to the bar cart, and poured himself a glass of whiskey. His hands were steady, but his silence carried weight. "I told him," Darius said quietly, "the day I gave him that money, that if anything he did ever touched you, there would be consequences." Sarah stepped toward him. "Do you think he's in trouble again?" He sipped his drink. "Greg doesn't just walk into trouble. He builds it, brick by brick, and acts surprised when the house collapses." She flinched. Not because the words were harsh, but because they were true. "Do you want me to talk to him?" she asked carefully. "No," Darius said instantly. "If he wanted to speak to you, he'd have called. He's making noise, and I won't allow it to reach your ears. But he's my brother." "No, Sarah." Darius's voice darkened. "He stopped being your brother the moment he made you a bargaining chip. I was the one who protected you. I was the one who gave him a way out. And this is how he repays it?" Sarah's heart broke, because deep down, she knew Darius was right. And what hurt most was that she wasn't even surprised. That night, the penthouse was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. The shadows of Greg's betrayal seeped into every corner. Around midnight, Benjamin called. He's trying to sell information, rumors, personal things, to a reporter from Pulse Weekly. They've been seen together twice. I don't know what he's shared, but if he leaks anything, Darius didn't let him finish. I'll handle it, he said coldly, and hung up. Sarah found him minutes later in the office, typing out something on his laptop. What are you doing? She asked gently. Freezing every account Greg has ever used, he said, voice low, precise. Shutting every access point. I'll make sure he vanishes again, this time with no lifeline. You do that to your best friend? I'd do that to anyone who threatens you. She froze, heart catching at the raw intensity in his voice. I meant what I said, Sarah, he continued. You're the only woman I've ever loved, and I will destroy anyone who tries to harm you, even if it's someone I once called a friend. Tears pricked her eyes, not out of fear, but because she had never been loved so fiercely, so unapologetically. Greg's betrayal hurt, yes, but what Darius was offering her now was security she hadn't even known she needed. I trust you, she whispered. He looked up at her, softened by her faith. Then let me protect what we built, he said, because people like Greg, they don't just break things, they poison them. The next morning, the Pulse Weekly headline read, Exclusive, Greg Lawson declares bankruptcy and blames billionaire brother-in-law. But nothing else leaked. No interviews, no recordings, no scandal. Darius had silenced the fire before it could burn. And when he walked into their bedroom that night, undressed and slid beside her in bed, he whispered one thing against her shoulder before sleep claimed him. I will never let anyone steal you from me. And Sarah believed him. Because when Darius loved, he loved with everything. It had been 6 months since Greg vanished again, this time for good. Darius never spoke his name again, and Sarah didn't ask. Whatever remained of her brother was a chapter they had both closed, quietly, without ceremony. Sometimes grief doesn't need closure. It needs distance. And Sarah had made peace with that. What remained now was stillness. Not the kind that echoed through empty walls, but the kind that hummed in the spaces between shared laughter, slow Sunday mornings, and 2 cups of coffee on the balcony overlooking a city that no longer felt overwhelming. Sarah stood barefoot in the kitchen, hair in a loose bun, reading through emails on her tablet. She wore one of Darius's shirts, unbuttoned low, her bare legs curled against the stool. Darius walked in shirtless, towel around his waist, hair damp from the shower. He watched her for a moment before speaking. You look like the boss now. She grinned without looking up. I've been learning from the best. Dangerous, he murmured, walking to kiss the top of her head. Their mornings had become a rhythm, so natural, so unforced. He still kept parts of himself close to the chest, but more and more he let her in. The piano room wasn't silent anymore. He played sometimes, just a few notes, but they were always for her. She never pressed for more. His love language wasn't noise, it was consistency, attention, the way he always made sure her car was serviced before a trip, how he studied her moods, how he kissed her like she was air. They had become a team, not just husband and wife by paper, but partners, lovers, friends. Later that evening, Darius invited her to join him at the rooftop terrace. She found him standing there under soft golden lights, dressed in a black cashmere sweater and slacks. Hands in his pockets, eyes lifted toward the stars. What is it? She asked, stepping into his space. He didn't answer immediately. He just reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black box. Her heart paused. He opened it. Inside was a second ring, thinner than the one from their wedding day, but encrusted with tiny diamonds shaped like petals. This one isn't for obligation, he said softly. It's for choice. Sarah blinked through tears. Darius, I married you out of necessity, he continued, but kept you out of love. And now I'm asking you again. No contracts, no conditions. Just, will you choose me now, as I have chosen you? She didn't hesitate. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. He slipped the new ring onto her finger, leaned down and kissed her deeply under the Lagos sky. That night they made love again, but this time not to erase doubt or silence ghosts. They did it to celebrate what they had become. Two people who found gold not in wealth, but in the healing of each other's wounds. And when they fell asleep in each other's arms, Sarah knew this was peace. This was home. This was the kind of love people mistook for myth. And it was hers, forever. Sunday mornings in the Alexander penthouse were sacred. It had become a tradition for Sarah to wake up to the scent of cinnamon French toast and Ethiopian roast coffee. Darius's quiet way of spoiling her before she even opened her eyes. He wasn't much of a chef, but he made the effort, and that mattered. That morning, sunlight poured through the curtains like peace itself. Sarah was halfway through dressing when her phone buzzed on the marble vanity. At first, she ignored it, but then it buzzed again and again. Something was wrong. She unlocked the screen and immediately froze. The headlines stared back at her in bold, salacious type. The Lavender Marriage. Is billionaire Darius Alexander still hiding behind his wife? Pulse Weekly, special report by Cynthia Orocco. Her fingers trembled as she clicked it open. It wasn't just another whisper in the gossip circles. It was a full exposé. The article was as venomous as it was calculated, dissecting Darius's history like a surgeon with a grudge. It recycled old photos, drawing attention to the fact that, for over a decade, he had never publicly dated any woman before Sarah. It made thinly veiled accusations of his sexuality, suggesting he had only married a woman to complete the illusion of the perfect African power figure. They called her the calm, soft-spoken, political wife and painted their entire relationship as a modern-day lavender arrangement. Elegant, respectful, but emotionally vacant. Her throat tightened. They hadn't just questioned her husband. They had insulted her marriage, her child, her identity. And all without a shred of proof. The air shifted behind her. She turned to find Darius standing in the doorway of the bedroom, freshly shaven, wearing a crisp white shirt, holding his phone. He'd seen it too. The room buzzed with a silence that felt like a string pulled too tight. Sarah expected rage, or a broken glass, maybe even a curse word. But Darius did none of that. He walked slowly to the edge of the bed, sat down and stared at the city through the tall glass windows. Then, very softly, he said, "It was only a matter of time." She came to him, her heart still pounding. "They called me a beard," she whispered. He looked up at her then, and in that moment, he didn't look like the unshakable mogul the world feared. He looked like a man pushed too far. "I know," he said. "I read it all." She sat beside him, their knees touching. "Darius, what are we going to do?" His jaw flexed. "Exactly what we should have done long ago." Within an hour, his lawyer, social media strategist, and Benjamin were all on a private conference call. "No threats," Darius instructed. "No bluffing. If they want war, we give it to them. But legally, I want every blog, every outlet that so much as reposts this slander, sent a cease and desist, immediately." Benjamin's voice came through the speaker. "And social media? I'll handle that myself." Sarah watched him as he stood, moved to his private office, and took out the only thing more powerful than any press statement, his phone. Darius hadn't tweeted in nearly 2 years. His feed had always been clean, corporate, and neutral. Until now, his fingers moved quickly, typing, pausing, then deleting, rewriting, calculating the weight of every word. Then finally, with the storm sitting heavy over Lagos, he hit send at Darius Alexander. "To those spreading false, dangerous stories about my marriage, my wife, and my family. This ends now. I owe you nothing. I owe my peace everything. One more lie and legal action will follow, against every source, platform, and individual. Leave us alone. We are not your gossip column." Enough. Alexander statement. The tweet hit like a tsunami. Within minutes, it had over 500,000 retweets. Celebrities, politicians, business leaders began to weigh in. Some supported him, some played neutral, others mocked, but no one ignored it. For the first time, the silent billionaire spoke for himself, and it echoed louder than any fabricated headline ever could. Sarah watched it unfold from the couch, heart in her throat. She'd never seen him angry like this, not screaming or throwing things, but laser-focused, cold, precise. By evening, Pulse Weekly had pulled the article from their homepage. By midnight, Darius's legal team had sent out 32 cease and desist letters to influencers, bloggers, and even 2 rival CEOs who had shared the story with snide captions. But the moment that broke her was a message sent to her personal inbox. It was from a woman named Amina. "Dear Sarah, I read the article this morning and cried. I've lived with a man for 5 years who won't publicly claim me because I'm not the right image. What you and Darius have, whether people understand it or not, is yours, and it gave me hope today. Thank you for loving in a world that demands performance. Stay strong. Amina." Sarah clutched her chest and cried, not because of the attack, but because they had made it through. They had become something more than what the world expected, more than what they were forced into, more than what pain had shaped them to be. That night, as the city dimmed and the drama cooled, Sarah joined Darius on the balcony. He stood shirtless, his back to her, the wind brushing against his skin. She wrapped her arms around him from behind. "You okay?" she asked. "No," he said, "but I will be." She rested her head against him. "You didn't have to fight that hard. You could have stayed silent." "No," he said, "I've stayed silent my whole life. For my mother, for my past, for my peace. But no one attacks my wife and my unborn child and expects me to stay silent again." She turned him to face her, and in his eyes she saw it. Not pain, not even pride, but protection, fire, love. "I don't care what the world thinks," she said softly. "I only care about this. Us. You and our daughter," he whispered, placing a hand on her belly, "are the only truth I need." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other, shielded from the world below. Let them talk. Let them speculate. Let them mock what they couldn't understand. Darius had made it clear. This was not a lavender marriage. It was gold, tested by fire, sealed by truth, and built to last. 1 year later, the Alexander Foundation launched its first women's shelter in Lagos. The building stood tall in Lekki, modern, sunlit, and dignified, a haven designed to feel like a second chance. On its opening day, the press swarmed the red carpet outside, but inside everything felt sacred. Sarah Alexander stood beneath the ivory banner with golden lettering, "The Celeste House, for every woman who stayed too long and every woman who found her way out." The crowd clapped as she cut the ribbon, tears shining in her eyes. Celeste, Darius's mother. The shelter was more than charity. It was healing, stitched into concrete and paint. A part of Darius's past rewritten with purpose. It had taken months of planning, permits, and quiet tears, but it was real now. And it was just the beginning. Darius stood beside her, his hand resting protectively on the curve of her belly. She was 6 months pregnant. Their daughter kicked every time Sarah laughed, every time Darius whispered to her stomach, every time they talked about the future. He kissed Sarah's temple as the applause faded. "She'll grow up with love," he murmured, "the kind we never had to question." Sarah smiled, resting her hand over his, "and strength, because she'll see what her father overcame and what her mother believed in." They walked inside hand in hand. No security, no press, just presence. Inside the shelter, there were fresh white sheets on every bed, warm lighting, bookshelves, a piano in the corner of the common room, because every woman deserved to find her melody again. Later that evening, the couple returned to the penthouse. It still overlooked the city, but now it smelled faintly of vanilla lotion, baby books, and fresh roses Darius sent every Friday without fail. In the nursery painted a soft lilac. A tiny gold-framed quote hung over the crib. Some legacies are built in silence, others in love. Sarah ran her fingers over her belly, leaning into Darius's chest. I never imagined this, she whispered. Neither did I, he said, but I wouldn't change a thing. The city buzzed below. But in their world, peace wasn't just golden. It was earned. And it was blooming. Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.